Environmental Affairs Minister Barbara Creecy says that further criminal charges may be instituted against the Mumbai-based chemicals giant United Phosphorus Limited, UPL. Now, the company's warehouse at Cornubia near Umhlanga in KwaZulu-Natal was razed to the ground during the July unrest. According to authorities, the warehouse, which stored toxic pesticides and chemical products, was operating without permits and flouted all environmental regulations. Releasing a report into the preliminary investigation into the factory, Creecy says that the company started its operation without requisite permits. To talk to us a little bit about this, we're now joined by Nhlanhla Sibisi, who's a climate and energy campaigner at Greenpeace Africa. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program. I am pretty sure that you're shocked that we've got companies in this country dealing in very dangerous chemicals, operating without proper licensing.
Peter, not only are we shocked, but also it's an indication of what we've been highlighting for a number of years now, to say that, we already have regulations in the country. We already have standards that we need to actually apply. But unfortunately, we have seen this unfortunate incident, and unfortunately, we have also seen a situation where government has sort of like dilly-dallied for a while before they've come to the approach that they have taken. And as a civil society and citizens of this country, especially in the Cornubia area and the surrounding area, they have highlighted the impacts that this spillover has created. And as much as we welcome the fact that the Department of Environmental Affairs is finally recognizing this incident and its impact that it has not only on the environment but also on human lives, that it's about time that some action needs to be taken, because this is a company, UPL, that has had a record of incidences of non-compliance, not only in South Africa but also in India.
So who's at fault here? Companies will get away with what they can get away with, so we won't even start there. But somebody needs to be checking that you've got a license to operate. Isn't there an authority whose job it is to go around every single company, particularly those involved in dangerous chemicals, to check whether they are complying with safety standards?
Actually, Peter, there are different levels of authorities that should actually be looking at it, and that is questionable in the sense that why in this particular incident, with all the different levels that, for example, the environmental impact assessment should have been done, the assessment of understanding what type of chemicals that are stored on site, and what are the impacts that it could have on the environment in case of any spillover. As we have seen, there has been a spillover. So if you ask me the question in terms of who should be held responsible, it is the authorities, and starting from the local government level to the national government level. And that is exactly what we have been saying throughout, that, for example, starting with the eThekwini municipality, and these are questions that we've been asking them, what are the processes that have been followed by this particular company, UPL, to actually get the relevant and required assessments that they need to apply. So in this case, we squarely place the blame from the local level up to the national government level, and saying that they did not follow the correct procedures. And I'm glad that at some point, at this point in time, they've even come to acknowledge that the company did not have, for example, just using one promulgation, that is the environmental assessment, that they did not have. So there is no doubt that we can squarely place the blame at the door of government.
Are we saying that if there was no looting that took place, that we may not have known about this blatant violation of the rules?
Unfortunately, we can say that, but at the same time, we also need to acknowledge that, just because this unfortunate incident happened, now that we are getting to actually get the truth, and that takes us back to the fact that, this particular UPL company was under the presidential program in terms of being given preferential treatment. As to why does that happen in this country, and especially, and I need to repeat that, especially under the fact that we are dealing with very dangerous chemicals. There's a variety of chemicals, and from the list that we have seen, it's over 160 types of different chemicals that have a direct impact on human lives and also the environment. As to why that has not actually been followed through in the correct procedures, because we have standards, we have processes that needs to be followed by companies when they establish themselves and they store especially these dangerous chemicals in the areas in which they are located. Why was that not done? And that's the question that we're actually wanting the government to come out clearly on, because as much as admitting that UPL did not have the necessary processes that they had followed, but how did that happen and why did it happen? And I think that the government has something to answer to.
I was speaking to somebody at the Wits School of Governance the other day, and they talked about whenever processes are not followed, it's not a mistake. It is done deliberately to circumvent and to for gain, probably. So it looks as if that there must be some foul play here.
Well, what I can tell you is that, because, as a government system, the government system that we have, they have their own priorities that they have set out. And amongst those priorities that they have set out is that, we want job creation, we want to develop the economy, but there's always the mishap of actually not looking at the environmental impacts that it has. So in this instance, this is a typical example of where we see that we are prioritizing economic development over people's well-being and as well as over the well-being of the environment. But the most important thing that we are actually, overlooking in terms of, not following all of these processes, it's because we believe that economic development is the most important thing leading up to job creation, and then we forget that at the end of the day that there are people's lives that could be impacted if these processes are not followed. And there's a reason why we have the different levels of government processes that needs to be followed, and also there's a reason why we have the different types of legislation that exist in this country. It's precisely also to protect all aspects, not only the economic development of the country. And in this instance, one of the things that was completely overlooked is the impacts that it would have on people's lives and the environment. And unfortunately, we have seen this because from this incident, we have seen different communities around Cornubia in the Umhlanga area have reporting that they've had difficulty in breathing when those chemicals went up in flame, and we've seen the various pictures that were shared by like SABC and other media houses where they were showing the marine environment being impacted and fish floating and being killed, and the different estuary or the rivers that we have seen in the area have been impacted. So that tells you that, we are prioritizing gains, as you rightfully said, Peter, over what is important, and it is people's lives.
Does this point to the possibility that there are many other companies operating without proper licenses, and that actually we may be in a lot of danger from many areas?
You just need to follow all the noise that we have been making as a society, and this is unfortunately being ignored, and we are being regarded as, people who have no regard about the economy, who have no regard about what what we are seeing is that, all of these processes that we keep on highlighting are processes that actually lead to what is enshrined in the Constitution, what has been promulgated in terms of legislation, to show that, you can't ignore one over the other. And this is a typical example of where all the noise that we have been making as civil society to try and show that you cannot ignore the environment has now come to fruition. And unfortunately, it has created a situation where now we are talking about a situation where we don't know what the future impact is of those people who have been breathing those fumes. And this is why government needs to learn to listen to scientists. They need to learn to listen to communities. They need to learn to listen to civil society when they highlight these issues, because we don't pluck them from the air. All the information that we actually put out there is information that is scientifically based, but also at the same time, it's about the concerns that the normal citizen has. And they may not be privy to all the scientific evidence like the organizations of Greenpeace have, like we do have right now. But we are highlighting those problems, those challenges, to say that, if this is not followed or processes are not followed, this is the outcomes that, that we could see ourselves finding ourselves into.
So what would you like to see happening as Greenpeace?
We would like to see justice happening to start with. And I know for some people it may seem like it's a far-fetched thing, but for those companies, and in this case, being particular about UPL, we need to see them being held accountable in the sense that we want to know, and we want to know in terms of a complete list, because as I mentioned earlier on, we've seen a list that consists of over 160 different types of chemicals. And I can tell you now, if we go to the lab, and our science lab have actually shown us that what are the different impacts of those different chemicals that have on human life. For example, it could lead to, an exacerbation of people that have already, ailments like asthma. It could lead to people having cancer, etc. And I can go on and on and on. What we would like to see is that government now realizing from this mistake that they have actually allowed to happen, to make it a point that our processes, and when I talk about processes, I'm talking about following the Constitution, following the legislation that we have, even going down to the local government level, like the eThekwini municipality, and making it a point, because they also have their own scientists, and it's not like we're talking about authorities that don't have the right advisors, that don't have the right authorities and capacity to look into the impacts. So we need to start seeing them taking action, and the legal action must continue. If I can emphasize that, legal action must continue against UPL so that they don't flout the rules. And this should serve as a lesson, not only to UPL, but to any other companies. And you mentioned earlier on, Peter, when you were saying that this may not be the only company. We have evidence to prove that there are other companies that are actually flouting the rules and creating untold damage to the environment, untold damage to human health. And we've seen that in different communities in which we have engaged with and even did our own scientific research to prove that. So that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see the government taking full responsibility of this, but also making it a point that through the legal processes that we have, that they get this company to account for what they did. And we would also like to see this organization compensating those communities that have been impacted. And that should not be negotiable, because then they will never learn their lesson.
All right, that's where we're going to leave it. And Nhlanhla Sibisi, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the program and giving us some insights on a very concerning issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.